An Egglocke is a special kind of Nuzlocke where, as always, any Pokemon that faints has to be boxed forever. Except the first Pokemon I find per route has to be replaced by an egg sent in by one of you. And you guys had sent me a great deal of eggs. So after gathering the first few encounters around Meli Island, it was time to see what you guys had sent me. I needed these encounters to be good, because I'd asked some of my friends to replace the enemy teams, and I had no idea what I'd be facing, basically a randomizer with guaranteed difficulty. So I was very glad to see the first egg hatch into Beldum. You guys were allowed to give these Pokemon any ability in the game, and ya boy Moy did not disappoint, giving Beldum Levitate, eliminating one of its weaknesses. The second egg from Styx Beast hatches into Drought Houndour, turning it into an absolute beast. The Hoppip from Sergal isn't quite as impressive, but perhaps having Intimidate will make it somewhat useful. The fourth egg from Jacob Maloney hatches into Prankster Sableye, and if we could keep this thing alive until we get Toxic and Will-O-Wisp, it could be an absolute beast. Upon reaching Hau'oli City, we'd soon have to face the first major battle versus Alima, and I was terrified. Earlier in the stream, I had faced this man and his Shinx, and this is where I learned exactly how cruel my friends had decided to be. You're looking at a guy who was not expecting to be hit by a quad-effective egg move he had no idea Shinx could learn in the first place. And with other crazy moves like Ice Fang and Signal Beam, it wasn't long before Attempt 1 was over. Losing Attempt 1 before I'd even gotten to the first trial had set the tone for the run, and I needed to make better decisions. For starters, I actually remember picking up my encounter in Hau'oli City. The egg hatches into a Moxie Machop from Joe Wheelis. Additionally, I thought I could outsmart my friends. By picking a different starter, this changes Ilima's team. And seeing his first Pokemon was Lillipup, I thought I'd outsmarted my mates. A quick switch to Bruno, and not only can we knock Lillipup out, but also boost our attack with Moxie. I thought I was set up for victory, but it turns out my friends had got the best of me. On top of facing a Rayquaza, of course it has to trace my Moxie. This was worse than Attempt 1. But even so, I was gonna give it my best shot, swapping out into Karen as Rayquaza goes for Twister. At this level, Twister's the only thing Rayquaza can do, unless my friends were evil enough to give it move tutor moves. This is why I send in Karen first, since we can use Priority Recover and thus not get flinched. This does confirm for me that Rayquaza only has Twister, and while Recover is able to heal back just a bit more health than Rayquaza's doing damage, Twister has way more power points than Recover, so eventually, this is a losing battle. Karen has no way of getting damage on this thing, so I swap back out into Bruno. Twister does do way over half, but with a held Oranberry, I'll be able to tank another one, unless it gets a crit, of course. And if we flinch, it's on to Attempt 3, but luckily, Bruno manages to land the Leer before I switch him out. I send in Steven, who's basically my only hope at this point, since at least we resist Twister. There's still the chance to flinch, but Steven manages to land the first Iron Head, which does about a third because of that Leer. Things were not looking good, but the second turn, Steven manages to proc Quick Claw, outspeeding and guaranteeing we land a hit, but unfortunately not getting the flinch. We don't get the Quick Claw proc the next turn, and Twister takes us down to just 1 HP. And not only does Steven hold, we don't end up flinching and take out Rayquaza. And even though that was way more stressful than Attempt 1, we managed to make it through Alima Deathless and finally reach Route 2. This meant I could pick up a few new encounters, and I was excited to see what you guys had sent me. At least the No Guard Hoot Hoot from Captain Blaze is pretty good, since we can always hit Hypnosis. Both Machop and Sableye were overleveled at this point, so we needed one final egg. And Barry did not disappoint, since Water Bubble Wimpod with Aqua Jet is awesome, which means I'd reached the first island trial. I'd told my friends to not go too crazy with it, but then again, I had just battled a Rayquaza in the very first boss fight, so as far as I was concerned, anything could happen. And much to my great dismay, the first trial had been replaced with Mega Altaria. With a boost to its defense, how was I ever going to get damage on this thing? Well, at least I had somewhat of a plan going in. The idea before the fight was to intimidate whatever we faced with Gardenia and then try to land a poison powder. Because Altaria goes for Growl, the plan actually ends up working out. However, oddly, Altaria doesn't take any damage before calling its ally Pokemon Swablu. Okay, so the Mega Altaria has Magic Guard. This is going to be a bit more rough than I thought. To have any hope of getting through this, I need to get rid of the Swablu, so I end up staying in to land a poison powder. Then after taking some big damage from Peck, we swap out into Steven. Beldum is basically going to be our only hope here, since we have super effective damage against Mega Altaria, and Steel resists both of its stabs. And instantly, Steven manages to proc Quick Claw and deal some great damage with Iron Head. But for this one step forward, I take 3 steps back. First, Altaria puts me to sleep with Sing. And while that's a massive inconvenience, the real issue is that Altaria doesn't have Magic Guard, it's Poison Heal, and I had just enabled this thing's degeneracy by going for Poison Powder. This was going to be a much bigger problem than I first anticipated. Steven ends up only sleeping for one turn, and we get a Quick Claw as soon as we wake up. And while this deals a lot of damage to Altaria, Growl makes sure we won't do too much damage in the future. On top of that, Swablu keeps annoying me with super effective Astonish, so I knew I had to switch out. I swap back in Gardenia, which is just a sacrifice, but at least on the way out, we can get an Intimidate to lower their attacking power. I was hoping we wouldn't have to fill up the Fainted box quite so soon, but I was left with no choice. With my free switch, I send in Marnie to set up the Sun, which gives Ember more than enough power to finally take out that Swablu. Marnie even takes a Disarming Voice fairly well. I try to deal some damage, but Ember is basically doing as much damage as Poison Heal is getting back. So I've got to switch out, but I do it at the worst possible time since Altaria goes for Sing. I don't really have a choice. I have to stay in and try and burn these sleep turns, but with Altaria going for Growl, we basically won't be doing any damage as soon as we wake up. And by the time Steven stops snoozing, we're already down to just 12 HP. I've got to switch out to get rid of the attack drops, otherwise we stand no chance. I send in Wallace, who actually manages to dodge a Sing. My damage with Aqua Jet is absolutely pathetic, so instead I switch it up and go for Draining Kiss, which is doing just a little bit more than Poison Heal gets back. The healing is also relevant since it gives me a few more turns to attack before Love Disc inevitably goes down. Oh no, what a loss. From here, Steven is our only hope, and while Altaria immediately takes out 5 of our 12 remaining HP, at least it didn't put us to sleep. Ironhead does really good damage, but after Poison Heal, it looks like we're gonna need 2 more. Steven thankfully dodges the Sing, and an Ironhead just barely falls short of the KO. It all comes down to one last dodge, and Steven pulls it off. Altaria misses the 55% accurate Sing, which means somehow Attempt 2 is still alive. And in case you're wondering why you can see my face cam every now and then, it's because this run happened on Twitch, where I'm currently doing a Volt White 2 Redux run. So if you want to catch runs like this live in the future, make sure to go follow me over on Twitch. Grabbing my 2 previously overleveled Pokemon from the box, I had a full team to take on Hala. And while things started out pretty smoothly, Hala's second Pokemon was a Shaman, and Bruno ended up getting Bloom Doomed. Kinda sucked since 3 of my Pokemon could have resisted it, but in the end, a fairly worthwhile sacrifice to get the KO with Houndour, and thus completing Meli Meli Island. Once on Akala, I get my next egg, hatching into the Gen 7 Bounce Suite. And with Refrigerate giving it access to Ice-type coverage, this is the exact type of creativity from you guys that makes me love these challenges. And with the new level cap set at 20, we can get half of our team to evolve before we take on the second trial. Here, we normally have to take on Totem Araquanid in the rain, but instead, my friends had me taking on the Lord of the Sea. Lugia with boosted attack is a force to be reckoned with, but that wasn't all. Not only is the rain powering up its potential water-type moves, its ability is Psychic Surge, setting up terrain that boosts its psychic moves by 50%. Feint Attack barely does anything to the behemoth, but Lugia tries to go for Whirlwind, which apparently doesn't work in these totem battles. Realizing it can't switch me out, Lugia goes for Water Pulse, which does a fair amount of damage to Karen before I hit it with a second Feint Attack. Pidgey tries to Whirlwind me, so I realize what my friends were trying to do, using Whirlwind to phase between my Pokemon so that I'd have to take unnecessary damage by switching. Fortunately for me, Whirlwind just doesn't work, and after getting some health back from an Oran Berry, I use a third Feint Attack to get Lugia below half. At this point, I can't risk Sableye going down to a crit, so I swap out into Marnie to set up the Sun and get rid of that pesky rain. Which means even though I'm switching right into a Water Pulse, I barely take any damage. Then after taking a Gust and getting a bit of health back from an Oran Berry, I go for a Stab Bite, which does about half of Lugia's remaining health. Because I'm not at risk of a crit, I stay in and take Lugia out with another Bite the next turn, leaving me with just Pidgey. Because of Moody, the thing has a lot of evasion boosts at this point, so I swap out into Elder Lee, who's got no guard, to guarantee I hit each Confusion to defeat the trial. But a deathless victory against the trial would come with its consequences. To make sure my team never got too overpowered, anytime I beat a trial deathless, Twitch chat got to vote a Pokemon off my team. And while you guys were fairly merciful this time around, voting off Sableye, it still stung. But our replacement encounter ended up being pretty good. Tough Claws Dredagon was an absolute monster and proceeded to tear up the game until the next trial. Even during the fire trial, it easily handled the Pokemon we have to fight before the totem without taking any damage. Going into the trial, we face the most volcanic Pokemon there is, really should have seen it coming. After I Dragon Rage it, it ends up calling its Team Aqua counterpart. I end up getting a lucky easy KO on Sharpedo with a critical hit slash. It seemed too good to be true, and alas, it was. Why is it every time I play Pokemon, things keep blowing up in my face? But we won the trial, I guess. The good news was chat didn't get to vote off one of my Pokemon, but the bad news was I had lost my best one anyway. Luckily, its replacement was a Rockhead Aerodactyl, a pretty competent single stage at this point in the game. We're also now able to evolve Houndour before taking on Totem Lurantis. The thing was randomized into a Guzzlord with one of the most annoying sets of all time. With the ability Harvest and a held Citrus Berry, I could barely ever get damage on this thing. It didn't put up much of a fight, but the total battle wasted 30 minutes of my time. So, after you guys rudely voted off Noctowl, we hatch our next egg into Drampaw. And with Analytic, this slow-moving dragon could be an absolute powerhouse. And so we had made it to the second kahuna. Hala really didn't put up much of a fight, so I wasn't expecting Olivia to be too bad. But after dealing with her lead Nidoqueen, she sent in Mega Scizor. This was bad, especially for Arrow, who goes down to a single bullet punch. So I swap into my only out to this thing, Houndoom. In the sun, if I can land a fire move on this thing, it's toast. The only problem being, in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon, the enemies have EVs. And Mega Scizor outspeeds Houndoom with a savage spin out. This was very bad news, since I don't have anything that can hit this thing for good damage, and Mega Scizor is a defensive beast. I don't even know what I was thinking sending in Roark, since he instantly gets dropped by a bullet punch. I send in Steven, hoping to do anything. Bug Bite only does neutral damage, and we can take a few hits, so I managed to pull off a couple of bulldozes. In the end, Steven manages to take Mega Scizor just barely below half, before going down to the superior Steel type. I'd gotten some extra damage with flinches from Ironhead, but really I should have used a third Bulldoze. Desperate for that third speed drop, I go for a low sweep with Mallow before she goes down to a Bug Bite. Getting Scizor to -3 speed actually lets us outspeed with Mr. Fuji, which lets me connect with the Dragon Rage for the KO. For now, the run was still alive, but Olivia still had a Crustle. This time we weren't faster, but at least Smackdown didn't do half of Mr. Fuji's remaining health. Especially after eating a held Oranberry, I was really hoping to take 2 more hits, because Dragon Rage just barely did less than half, meaning Drampaw's second one leaves Crustle with just a little bit of health remaining. Crustle then gets all that health back with a Figgy Berry and hits me with a round. It doesn't KO, so we're still in this, connecting with a third Dragon Rage and taking Crustle back deep into the red. With only one more Pokemon left in the back, it all came down to this. Drampaw goes down to a Smackdown, leaving us with only Wimpod. And with the Egg move Aqua Jet, we're just barely able to beat the second kahuna. Seeing the Fainted box almost completely full and my team at the brink of extinction was brutal. And it meant we needed 5 new team members, starting with Poison Touch Pinsir. Our second team member was Regenerator Quillfish. From there, Speed Boost Slowpoke. Makes sense to me. Fourth was Super Luck Froakie. And finally, we got a Jirachi, which I was super excited about until I saw Truant. With our new Ultra Mega Epic team, we made our way to Ula Ula Island, where I instantly lost Marlin against House Blaziken. So we got to replace it with a prankster Rotom Wash. It was then time to take on Totem Mega Lucario. And to make matters worse, of course it got its defense boosted. I led with Zinnia, who'd taken a bit of damage from the trial puzzle before taking an Aura Sphere. I managed to land a Psychic, which doesn't quite do half, and Lucario gets its speed boosted. The mystery of Lucario's ally Pokemon ends up being Mew. And because it's Zinnia's Truant turn, I end up swapping into Olivia. She ends up eating an Aura Sphere, and ironically, Mew transforms into her, which means we're now facing 2 speed boost Pokemon. I stay in hoping to do some damage with Psychic, but a Dragon Pulse just clean takes Olivia out. I swap Zinnia back in, who's just barely able to survive another Aura Sphere, and to my surprise, we even survive Mew's Water Gun, allowing for another big Psychic, taking Lucario deep into the yellow before Zinnia inevitably goes down. I send in Koga the Quillfish, hoping to do anything with Aqua Jet, but forgetting that Lucario has a defense boost, so we barely touch it at all. And the combination of Dragon Pulse and Psychic is a bit too much for our fish to handle. Bugsy comes in next, and we Mega Evolve it into Mega Pinsir. It sucks to have to try and hit Lucario on the physical side, especially with a resisted move, and unsurprisingly, Quick Attack barely does anything. Pinsir does somehow manage to survive the incoming onslaught, and a second Quick Attack falls just barely short of taking Lucario out, despite being a critical hit. While this means we unfortunately lose Pinsir, at least it guarantees our victory with an Aqua Jet from the GOAT Guzma. We then simply Shadow Claw the Mew, and have to see our Slowpoke go down for a a second time. We did just lose 4 of our team members, so once again, we've got to hatch a new team, starting out with an Intimidate Bulbasaur, and the second into Technician Mimikyu. Thirdly, we once again get a Levitating Steel type in Riolu, but what I really wasn't expecting was our 4th egg hatching into Dialga. I told my friends not to include any eggs that would break the game, so clearly they thought this was fair, so I was expecting a horrendous ability, and it seems the God of Time has a bit of a confidence issue with the Wimp Out ability, which honestly doesn't seem like that big a drawback. I do, however, instantly forget that we don't have Disguise and end up losing Mimikyu to an Iron Tail. Honestly, I shouldn't be allowed to play these games. In need of a new team member, we go back to the old drawing board and hatch another egg. And Registeel seems like it'll be really good, especially with Levitate. There's not even a drawback to this thing. Feeling really solid about my team, I went into the 6th trial. The plan here was to lead with Golisopod and fire off a huge first impression. And after seeing Hoopa Unbound, a Pokemon that's quad weak to Bug, I felt really good about our matchup, even despite it having its defense boosted. I really couldn't think of a better play, so I just went for it. Okay, so things didn't exactly go to plan, and my friends definitely got the best of me with that one. So I went and picked up a new encounter and got my next egg from Typhlosion 78. It was a Desolate Land Cyndaquil. Who could have seen that coming? Our final task before leaving Ula Ula is facing the kahuna Nanu, who despite having a Mega Venusaur, got completely destroyed. But before we get to venture on to the final island, we have to make it through Aether Paradise. Here we face Lusamine, one of the most difficult fights in the base game, and I knew my friends wouldn't hold back. We're officially into the late game, and I knew things were serious as soon as I saw her lead Genesect. I lead with Brassius the Venusaur, hoping to get something statused, but also getting that bonus Intimidate. To be honest, this thing could have easily had Flamethrower, and staying in was a very bad idea, but the Genesect just ends up blowing up, which doesn't really do too much after the Intimidate. Second, she sends out Pheromosa, and even though Bug isn't super effective against Venusaur, I decide to swap out, since we're way more specially defensive, into our defensive tank Rotom. Because she went for Bounce, I can't outspeed with Priority Toxic, so I go ahead and set up a substitute, which doesn't even break from the bounce, allowing me to poison Pheromosa next turn. She does break our sub, but that doesn't really matter since we can easily just set up the substitute again the following turn. After getting bounced again, I hit Pheromosa with a Hydro Pump. This puts Pheromosa in range of being taken out by poison, however, a held eject button means it instead gets swapped out, which is a bit annoying. This brings in Luxray, so I let it break my substitute and get it poisoned before swapping out into Cyrus. Luxray goes for Snarl, which is a bit annoying since it lowers Dialga's special attack, which means we can't quite get the KO with Earth Power, but Poison seals the deal. Pheromosa comes back in, and I really don't want to get hit by a fighting move here, so I swap Cyrus out for Brassius. The Intimidate here is extra nice since Pheromosa is a physical attacker, but she just decides to bounce. This gives me the perfect opportunity to swap in Byron, who effectively takes no damage as Pheromosa goes down to poison. Excadrill comes in next, and with Mold Breaker, we're at risk of being earthquaked here. And this little maneuver reveals the special kind of idiot I am. To avoid having my Levitate Pokemon be taken out by a Mold Breaker Earthquake, I swap into a different Levitate Pokemon weak to Earthquake. This ends up getting Lucario knocked out by Brick Break, which Byron would have probably survived, but I kinda deserve that for making the goofiest play of all time. Lusamine's AI just goes for random moves, so Surge gets hit by a Smart Strike before almost taking Excadrill out with a Hydro Pump. We then just barely survive the Brick Break and take out Excadrill with another Hydro Pump, which somehow lands. Lusamine is now left with one Pokemon, a Mega Gyarados. So I swap out into Brassius as the Gyarados Dragon dances, but the attack boost is just nullified by Intimidate, and I take out the scary Scampy with a Petal Dance the following turn. Losing Lucario there is a little bit embarrassing, but these ability randomizers are extremely confusing sometimes. After beating Lusamine, we head to Pony Island, where I hatch an Aerialate Tauros. We'd come here to face the final two trials, and if they're anywhere as difficult as in the base game, I'd be in trouble anyway. But I had a gut feeling that this would be much, much worse. The 7th trial was versus Primal Groudon, and my team was cripplingly weak to Fire and Ground. The only strategy I had going into the fight was leading with Surge to poison whatever I could with Priority Toxic. Beyond that, at this point, I knew I just had to sacrifice whatever was necessary. I end up going for the Toxic, and I really wanted to try and preserve Rotom for whatever we face in the Ultra Necrozma fight, but Surge instantly gets obliterated by Groudon's Solar Beam. But hey, if I expected any of my plans to ever work, I'd constantly have a terrible time. The fact that we have Desolate Land Typhlosion, however, did give me a bit of a plan. Setting up our own Harsh Sun here gets rid of Drought. The downside of this plan is I did just set up the Sun for Primal Groudon and its ally Ho-Oh. Typhlosion also gets immediately sent to the Fainted Box before it ever gets to make a move by Groudon's signature Precipice Blade. But this does get rid of the Harsh Sunlight, meaning we're now at least not in the sun. I send in Norman, hoping to do anything. Yeah, the copium's pretty real right now, which instantly results in Dead Bull. Doesn't exactly give you wings. By this point, I had 3 Pokemon left, all of which were weak to either fire or ground, so things weren't exactly looking too good. I thought Brassius would be instantly torched here since it's highly flammable. But not only does Groudon set up the sun once again, Ho-Oh tries to as well, but fails. This free turn I've been granted allows me to put Ho-Oh to sleep, but more importantly, it gives me an extra free turn of poison. And despite setting up the sun the previous turn, Groudon goes for Precipice Blade, which isn't enough to take Brassius out. Ho-Oh, of course, sleeps the first turn, allowing me to set up a Leech Seed for even more passive damage, which actually kind of makes a difference since it also takes damage from Solar Power every single turn. I realize at this point I could have Mega Evolved Brassius right from the start and probably taken a few more hits. Better late than never, I suppose, and Groudon once again goes for Precipice Blades instead of Eruption. And by some miracle, Brassius actually holds. The Mega Evolution ended up making that bit of difference. Now, sadly, I thought I'd just be taken out, so I clicked Petal Dance, which unfortunately locks me into it. If I didn't use Petal Dance, I would have been able to switch out here instead of dealing some pathetic quad-resisted damage. So once again, because of my own stupid actions, I lose another Pokemon. On the bright side, Ho-Oh has just enough HP left that Solar Power actually just takes it out and wins us the fight. Somehow, we'd made it through that absolute disaster, once again losing most of our team. But our new encounters didn't disappoint, starting with Contrary Chimchar. Then, we got a Beast Boost Trapinch. But our third egg was possibly our best encounter yet, Giratina. With Stall, this thing always moves last, but Giratina's such a defensive beast, I still thought I could make it work. Our final team member was Bulletproof Type Null, which had been a bit overshadowed. With a new team assembled, I was ready to make my way to Ultra Space, where Ultra Necrozma had been replaced with the only Pokemon that might be more powerful. Of course, our opponent would be Mega Rayquaza. Without Rotom, I had to rely on tanking some hits from this +1 to all stats Mega Rayquaza, and of course, I missed my first Toxic. The second Outrage takes Registeel deep into the yellow, and thank goodness my second Toxic actually lands. I'd thankfully managed to remember to teach Byron Protect to get a little bit more damage before I have to swap out. Outrage also gets Rayquaza confused, which might be helpful. I don't have any great choices to switch into, so I swap out into Gladion as Rayquaza unfortunately breaks through confusion and hits me with a crunch. I didn't actually give Gladion Protect, so I've got to swap out once again, this time into Cyrus, as Rayquaza breaks out of confusion and hits me once again with an Outrage. This wimps us out into Gladion, who unfortunately doesn't have Protect and just falls next turn. Pretty unfortunate since Silvali's a really cool Pokemon that you otherwise never get to use, but it does pave the way for Flint to use a Fake Out, causing Rayquaza to flinch the turn that Poison takes it out. In need of a Pokemon, we hatch yet another egg, this time into Fluffy Scyther. Fluffy effectively means that you have twice as much physical defense, the drawback being that Fire-type moves deal twice as much damage. But swapping Scizor into a Fire-type move would almost always get it killed anyway, so it's not much of a drawback. This leads us into a bit of a boss rush, where we have to take on all the previous trial captains. But we end up making it through unscathed, which leads us to the final trial of the run. If we can beat this, we've made it to the Elite Four. Whatever I faced, my best strategy was to try and poison this thing, and of course, it's the creator of all Pokemon, Arceus. With 2 Omni Boosts, Arceus seems pretty much impossible to beat, so I knew I needed to poison it. As long as Arceus doesn't have something like Aura Sphere or Flamethrower, we should be good. Immediately, Arceus oddly hits me with a Flamethrower, revealing to me that it probably doesn't have a great move to hit Steel types. Byron, as per usual, of course misses Toxic. Arceus calls for its ally, and of course it's Palkia. Aside from the fact that it's pretty awesome that we have Dialga and Giratina facing down Arceus and Palkia, this is terrifying. On top of that, I of course miss my second Toxic. But just when I thought things were pretty much over, Arceus pulls out Perish song. I don't know if this is my friend's idea of trying to make this fight more fair, but despite missing my 2 toxics, I now had a win condition. Of course, Byron lands the toxic as soon as we don't need it. Performance anxiety, I guess. Now it was instead a matter of holding out for 3 turns, and I start by going for Protect, instantly getting them down to a Perish count of 2. Now expecting Hydro Pump and Hyper Beam to try and take me out, I swap out into Volo. Giratina's completely immune to Hyper Beam, so we don't take any damage from Arceus, and Hydro Pump is resisted. With her Perish count now down at 1, all I need to do is click Protect, stopping Spatial Rend from dealing massive damage or possibly even taking Volo out, and thus letting Arceus and Palkia's Perish count fall to 0. And while the legendaries didn't brutalize my team, the fact that I managed to win without a casualty meant that you guys got to vote a Pokemon off once again. And despite having Dialga and Giratina on the team, you guys deemed Beast Boost Flygon to be the biggest threat. Sorry, buddy. Ironically, our very next egg hatches into another Dragon Ground type in Zygarde 10%, and technically, before we can take on the Elite Four, we have to face the final Kahuna Hapu, who literally just ends up exploding, which maybe could have taken some of my mons out if I didn't have 3 steel types and a ghost. But actual disaster strikes shortly thereafter. While I was going through Victory Road, Squishy unfortunately ran into an Umbreon with Hidden Power Ice, and so we had to add another body onto the heaping pile of fainted Pokemon before we could make our final Elite Four preparations. Before going in, we needed to hatch one final team member, this time into Water Bubble Poplio. A water fairy type actually complements our team quite well, especially with all the dragons we have. It also covers our crippling weakness to fire. And so we had our final team, consisting of Flint, the Contrarian Fernape with Overheat, Close Combat, Fake Out, and U-Turn. Cyrus, the Wimp Out Dialga, who with held choice specs hopefully can deal massive damage with Roar of Time, Earth Power, Aura Sphere, and Flash Cannon. Byron, the Levitating Registeel with Toxic Protect to stall our opponents out, and Ironhead and Rock Slide for some damage. Juan, the Water Bubble Primarino with Aqua Jet, Ice Beam, Moonblast, and Sparkling Aria. Olo, the Stall Giratina with Shadow Ball and Aura Sphere for damage, Will-O-Wisp to wear down those physical attackers, and Shadow Sneak to bypass stall. And finally, Fluffy Scizor with Bullet Punch, Ironhead, Night Slash, and X-Scissor. With the Pokemon you'd sent me, I'd managed to make it all the way to the Elite Four, and I wanted nothing more than to make it to the end. I end up letting chat choose who we face first, since we have no idea what the trainers actually have. Molayne leads with Bouffalant, and my dedicated lead is Infernape. With both Fake Out and a reasonably fast U-turn, Infernape's a perfect Pokemon to lead with. I start with a Fake Out in case of Sturdy. From there, I somehow miss a 100% accurate Close Combat, but things get stranger when I don't get speed dropped from Rock Tomb. With Contrary, it would of course be a speed boost, but we don't end up seeing the stat change at all. Chad and I concluded that the only thing this could be is Bright Powder Bouffalant with Sheer Force as its ability. As stupid as that is, I really don't have any other options, so I stay in and go for the Close Combat again, and thankfully land this time. With Contrary, Close Combat actually ends up boosting our defenses. But even at +1 defense, Infernape definitely doesn't want to stare down Deoxys, so I'm forced to switch out since I'm not even faster. I send in Byron and start a war of attrition. After Deoxys goes for Psycho Boost, it lowers its own special attack by 2 stages, meaning it basically can't touch Registeel. From there, it was simply a matter of poisoning it and protecting every other turn in order to secure the KO. But with Deoxys defeated, we run into our next problem, and one that can't be poisoned, Celesteela. I use Protect to scout and learn that it has Flamethrower. Because we can't poison this thing, Byron isn't going to be very useful anyway, not that he ever lands those toxics regardless. So we swap out into Volo, and the worst thing Celesteela can do is fly. I then make it do even less damage with physical attacks by burning it, but mostly I'm just after that sweet damage over time that eventually allows me to take Celesteela out. Next up, we face Alakazam, but it just goes for Future Sight, so I immediately destroy it with a Shadow Ball. Molayne's final Pokemon is Roserade, so with a quick switch to Dialga, we had secured our first Elite Four victory. You guys decided we'd fight Acerola next, and oh boy was I not ready for what's to come. She leads with Celebi, which is actually perfect, since Infernape pretty much completely counters it. Our Fake Out U-Turn combo is perfect here. We break the potential Sturdy or Sash, and then go for the quad effective U-Turn, which just ends up being a KO. The only downside is we now have to switch out before Acerola sends in her Pokemon, giving her the advantage as she sends out Buzzwole versus Byron. I really don't want to get destroyed by a fighting move this early in the Elite Four, so I swap out into Giratina to dodge a superpower. Unfortunately, Buzzwole has Ice Punch, but it really doesn't deal too much damage to our defensive beast, allowing allowing me to fire back with a will-o-wisp, completely infantilizing the bug. From there, it's as simple as swapping Quan into an Ice Punch and then destroying this thing with a Moonblast. Of course, Acerola would have a Thunderous of all things, so I definitely have to swap Quan out. But swapping into Byron ends up being a terrible decision. Thunderous hits us with Thunder Wave, and while we're not expecting to be faster than anything, this really stinks. It then goes for Volt Switch, and this is where the nightmare starts. Acerola sends in Terrakion with Comatose. Of course, Byron lands the Toxic this time, but Comatose completely negates it. And this is where Paralysis is incredibly crippling, since it doesn't make Protect reliable, which would otherwise allow us to consistently stall Terrakion out of its 5 close combats. And to make matters worse, for some reason I decided to act like a complete fucking idiot, because after getting flinched by the first Rock Slide, I make a run-killing mistake by giving Terrakion a free Swords Dance as I try and will-o-wisp into Comatose directly after failing with Toxic. I'd completely thrown away the run. After Swords Dance, Volo can barely handle a Rock Slide, and Aura Sphere doesn't even do that much damage. At this point, I was in complete panic mode, and for good reason. The plan to try and stall Terrakion out of close combats wasn't even a good plan. Byron was by far my most defensive Pokemon, and it was taking tons of damage from boosted Rock Slides. But what sealed the deal was the second Swords Dance. I swapped out into Volo again, baiting a third close combat. But as I swapped back, Terrakion just set up to +6 instead of going for Rock Slide. I managed to stall out the fourth close combat, but as I swapped Byron back in, I almost took half my health from a resisted Rock Slide. And sure, I'd succeeded with my minigame of stalling Terrakion out of close combats, but where was I supposed to go from here? If I was gonna wipe, I at least wanted to have some kind of plan. I needed a sacrifice, and it was very difficult to make a choice this early in the Elite Four, especially when I didn't know what I was facing. And as I sent in Juan, I started watching it all fall apart. At this point, all I could hope was for Fluffy Scizor to be able to tank a +6 Rock Slide. If so, an Iron Head Bullet Punch combo might be enough to take Terrakion out, but even with all that defense, Aaron just couldn't take it. And with him, died the run. Except there was still one more thing I could try, something I wish I would have tried before sending in Scizor. Terrakion is just slightly faster than Infernape by base speed, but maybe, just maybe, Flint could have collected enough EVs to outspeed Terrakion. I needed Ape to be faster. And then, I needed the KO. Infernape had done it. Perhaps losing a third of my team will cause me to lose the run down the line, but for now, I was still in the game. Acerola sent in Excadrill, which we deleted with close combat. Finally, she only had Thunderous left, but it was no match for Dialga's Roar of Time. For now, I'd made it through the fight, but there was still half of the Elite Four left to face. Olivia put up a good fight, but a lot of her team was weak to Steel, making it a fairly easy battle, meaning there was only one more fight before we'd made it to the champion. Kahili could easily end the run, but I wanted so bad to make it to the champion. At this point, we've got very few options to work with, but it was nice to see her lead with Weezing since we can easily fake out and then U-turn out into Dialga to dodge the Sludge Bomb. Because we're down to so few Pokemon, I removed Dialga's choice specs, but Earth Power is still enough to take Weezing out, sending in Articuno. Because of Steel, Dialga isn't weak to Ice, so I decide to stay in against the Blizzard and fire off a Flash Cannon. It's not enough to take Articuno out, but the second Blizzard doesn't actually take us below half and wimp us out, so a Flash Cannon finishes Articuno off. Manaphy comes in third and instantly stirs up trouble by going for Tail Glow, getting its special attack to +3 immediately. I really can't afford to lose any more Pokemon if we want to stand any chance against the champion. I needed a plan, and I needed one fast. The best I could do for now is swap out into Byron in case Manaphy has Ice Beam. Resisting it makes a big difference here, but the real problem is gonna be if Manaphy has water moves. The next turn, it shows me Hydro Pump, and at +3, it does over half to Byron, who finally has learned how to land a Toxic when it matters most. I then go for Protect, getting a bit of poison damage, but also stalling out the second Hydro Pump. Expecting the third Hydro Pump, I swap out into Volo. Because of Giratina's great defenses, the +3 Hydro Pump barely does anything. I then swap back into Byron on an Ice Beam to bait further Hydro Pumps. And here, we run into a bit of an issue. At this point, I thought Manaphy had used 4 Hydro Pumps, so this would be the final one. It's incredibly distracting playing on stream, game, but it's mistakes like these that can cost you a run. Here I go for Protect, thinking I'm stalling out the 5th and final Hydro Pump. For this reason, I thought I was just safe staying in against Manaphy and that Poison would take it out the next turn. I actually didn't even realize that this double Protect saves Byron's life. On stream, I still thought I was lucky and that Manaphy just had PP maxed Hydro Pump and thus 8 PP, when in reality I'm just a stupid idiot who can't even count to 5. After finally having some luck for once, we take out Kahili's Toxapex with Earth Power from Dialga, which brings in her final Pokemon, Mega Sceptile. At which point, she decides to completely throw by going for Sunny Day, thus allowing me to blast her into the past with a Roar of Time. It had been a wild ride, but somehow I'd managed to make it all the way through the Elite Four. A part of me was so excited to see what my friends had cooked up for the final battle. With only 4 Pokemon, I knew my chances were slim to none. But I wasn't gonna let you guys in chat down. If I'm going out, it's gonna be with a bang. Whatever happens, it's time to end this. Out of the 4 Pokemon I had left, at least 3 of them were legendary, so maybe we could get somewhere. Hal leads with Azelf, so I'm expecting we'll have to deal with Stealth Rocks or possibly Explosions. I of course lead with Flint, going for my classic Fake Out U-turn combo. But for some reason, after getting faked out, Hal decides to swap out of Azelf into Tyranitar. This is fine by me, since U-turn will still be dealing super effective damage, and we get to pivot out into something that's effective against Tyranitar. I decide to send in Cyrus, since not only are we faster, but we have the quad effective move Aura Sphere. I would of course have preferred to get this KO with Infernape to boost my defenses with close combat, but we're down to a 4-on-5 as Hal sends back in Azelf. And Hal is an honorable guy, wanting to make this fight a 4-on-4 by blowing his Azelf up with Explosion before I even have the chance to attack it. With the odds evened, I felt a lot better about this fight as Hal sends out Incineroar. He starts with a Fake Out, which is basically just neutralized by leftovers. I then hit him hard with an Earth Power, hoping for that special defense drop, but you should be careful what you wish for, since Contrary gives Incineroar a boost to its special defense instead. Flare Blitz isn't quite enough to take me below half, and Incineroar gets even lower on health, giving me hope that maybe a second Earth Power will be enough to take it out. I've got no choice but to click the move, and it just barely falls short. Incin connects with the knockoff, dealing a ton of damage and getting rid of my leftovers while simultaneously wimping me out. My best course of action is to just send back in Flint. I immediately regret going for Fake Out since I want the boost with close combat, but I actually don't get the KO, allowing me to pick up the defense boost from close combat the next turn as I take it out anyway. With half of Hal's team defeated, he sends in Ultra Necrozma. I knew I'd run into this thing at some point, so I click U-turn and manage to outspeed. The super effective hit actually does a surprising amount of damage and allows me to swap out into Byron. Necrozma fires a prismatic laser, which is resisted but still does a good deal of damage. I didn't actually know that prismatic laser forces you to recharge, so I waste a turn going for Protect when I would have gotten the leftovers recovery I was looking for anyway. Necrozma sends another prismatic laser, taking Byron really low as I fight back with an Iron Head. This time, I know Necrozma's gonna be recharging, so I waste no time and go for Toxic. This way, as I protect for leftovers recovery the next turn, will be a bit productive by dealing some poison damage. Finally, we have to take one more prismatic laser, which does get a critical hit, and Byron just barely holds, meaning protecting for leftovers recovery really mattered. And at the end of the turn, Necrozma falls to poison. But with 2 Pokemon left, Hal sends out the God Volcarona. When first faced with this thing, I didn't realize how bad it was. But I did know it saw a KO with Fiery Dance, so I swap in Giratina and just prayed it wouldn't get a special attack boost. I end up going unpunished that turn, but Volcarona turns around and starts Quiver Dancing. And special attack, special defense, and speed is not where the boosting ends, since my now pathetic Shadow Ball triggers Stamina to boost its physical defense. I was in deep trouble. Any damage I try to put on this thing just makes it stronger and tougher to kill. If I wanted to beat this thing, I knew I needed strategy, because just continuing to attack with Giratina would make this thing unstoppable. I came up with a plan. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to give it a try. Byron had helped to get me this far, but it was time to let go. I swap into a Quiver Dance, but the following turn, a Fiery Dance takes Byron out. All I need is a safe switch to Flint. I'm not expecting Flint to be able to take this thing out, but it's still my best shot at getting as close as I can. I start with a Fake Out to get some chip damage, which triggers Stamina. Psychic is way more than strong enough to take us out, but because the Focus Sash is intact, we'll be able to get one Overheat off. At +2 special defense from quiver dancing, it's not a lot of damage. And at this point, stamina has boosted Volcarona's physical defense to +3. And after another psychic, we lost yet another Pokemon. How had managed to swing back into the fight, turning this into a 2-on-2. Dialga just folds to Fiery Dance, so I'm forced to swap in Volo, who at least has full HP. Volo takes a +2 psychic and tanks it surprisingly well before firing off a Shadow Ball. It doesn't even do a third of what Volcarona has left, but all I can do is just continue chipping away at it. It looks like I can take another Psychic as I fire off my second Shadow Ball, and at +5 defense, I don't think Priority Shadow Sneak is enough to take Volcarona out. After Leftovers recovery, it looks like we might even survive a Psychic crit, guaranteeing that we send that final Shadow Ball to take Volcarona out. I had made it to How's final Pokemon, and this would be deciding the run. Champion How sends in his very own Giratina, and the only thing I could do was click Shadow Sneak. With Stall, everything else would be moving last, and as How's Giratina vanished, I knew the end for Volo had come. I now only had one Pokemon left, and if this Giratina has Speed EVs, we're screwed. And if we do outspeed, we have to not miss the 90% accurate Roar of Time. Whatever happened, this was the end. Cyrus had done it. He connected with Roar of Time, taking out Giratina, and against all the odds, I'd managed to do it. I'd beat a Pokemon Ultra Sun hardcore Egglocke. 30 of the Pokemon you guys sent me ended up in the Fainted box, and as ridiculous of a sight it is, we managed to make it all the way to the end. Playing through the ups and downs of this run on Twitch was an absolute blast, and if you want to catch moments like these live for yourself, make sure to go over to twitch.tv/AntlerBoyLive, drop a follow so you don't miss it, and hey, I might even be preparing a Pokemon X and Y Egglocke right now, so make sure you subscribe and stay on the lookout for when I'm asking for eggs. I'd like to lock your eggs.